Hello, and welcome to Radio NIGP. Our April episode examines a topic we all wish we could avoid, but will all encounter in our professional lives. Because while we always hope for the best, contracts don't always work out the way we hope they will. This month, we look at what you can do when contracts go bad. So grab your drink of choice, sit back, and enjoy this episode of Radio NIGP.
Welcome back to Radio NIGP. I'm Kevin Yin, and joining with me are Charlie Rossell and Don Buffum, and we are doing the hot topic segment of this session. And in today's discussion, we're trying to figure out how do we typically deal with contract problems. And the answer that, at least from our experience, has been that we tackle those before the solicitation hits the street, and understanding what the potential risks are, and then what options do we have in order to mitigate those potential risks. So I'm going to have us start out with Charlie and have him share what he does to help us mitigate those contract problems down the road.
Hi, thanks, Kevin. Hello, everybody. Charlie with Radio NIGP. So up here in Cleveland with Cleveland Metro Parks, I am the director of purchasing, and I think the key thing is, and I think this is with everything, with marriage, relationships, you name it, is communication. Communication, that's where it starts. The biggest thing I see, and to help reducing risk and to help, mitigate the potential for risk, is communication. Here at Cleveland Metro Parks, I deal a lot with contracts on the commodity side of things. Purchasing, uniforms and various aggregate material. This is one of my favorite ones: frozen rats and rabbits for our zoo animals. But the key is that communication with the staff to get exactly the specifications, the scope of work, because some of the things that we feed our animals, it has to be so specific. And for example, like when we feed our elephants, the specifications for the various types of hay are so minute and so finite. That's important, because if we feed the elephant something wrong, or a different animal, there could be a particular weed in that hay, and we don't want to have that negative outcome. So it all starts with communication. It all starts from the end user, working with our clients to figure out what do they want to help mitigate those risks. And we also handle some service things as well. And like janitorial cleaning service is actually one of them. Got a call today from our vendor that we use, and they've been trying to get a hold of 3 of our golf courses to set up scheduling to start the cleaning. And our vendor said, Charlie, I've been calling, I've been leaving messages. I said, Ramona, sounds like you're a little bit upset. So I said, call me at the very beginning. So not even, us, internal staff, but even the vendor. There are things that the vendor starts interpreting things the wrong way. And I said, hey, let me be your voice. Let me be that conduit. Let me be that, conduit for information, for communication with our field, so I could get you where you need to go. So we, help reduce those risks and things like that. And I'll say one last thing before you ask your next question, Kevin, is the last thing I want to say is, and then this happens a lot that I see, myself and then our procurement analysts, we set up a lot of these commodity contracts, and we let the field know what's going on. But what we see is the field tries to fix the the problem themselves, if they're having some delivery issues or maybe something's on back order or some type of miscommunications going on with the end user and the vendor. So what I ask them to do is don't wait. Just reach out to myself and our procurement analyst. Not that we're the experts, but you know what? We have these relationships built with these vendors. And sometimes by getting an email or a phone call from myself or our procurement analyst, things happen pretty quickly.
Oh, Charlie hit it on the head with communication. Just a couple of things that I thought of. The elephant hay is a perfect example for anybody, because when a requisition comes in and it says elephant hay, or it describes it really well, a buyer could think, oh, I'll just put it out as elephant hay, and all the sellers of elephant hay will know what we need.
Yeah. But
it's not that simple. So we used to buy Bobcat food, and it was really had to be certain blend and mix and everything. And that's the whole key, whether you're doing an IT purchase, whether you're doing a contract for services, it's that scope of work and the understanding of it up front. Not only does the end user need to understand it, but obviously your purchasing staff need to understand it. The vendors need to understand it. Mm-hmm. But I always found that I need to get IT involved sometimes, because how is it going to impact their operation? If there's new software or new hardware being purchased, they're going to be impacted because they're going to have to maintain the stuff. Like you said, legal, they need to be involved early. So if everybody takes the time up front to communicate and everybody understands the scope of work and the terms and conditions, when is it, how long do they have to deliver? If your using department is thinking, okay, we'll have it in 5 days, and the vendor saying, well, we'll have it to you 150 days, you're going to have conflict, right? Mm-hmm. But if the RFP or the IFB describes all that clearly, and so that people understand it, not in some technical jargon that people don't understand, then everyone can be expecting the same thing. And then one thing I wanted to mention, not only at the beginning, obviously the communication is important at the beginning, but then when you do the evaluation, make sure that everybody is in agreement on what you're getting and when you're going to get it. But also that contract administrator, who's going to be the responsible? So many times when I was in purchasing, we do my opinion, a great job developing the scope, the specifications, the bid, the contract, and then we hand it off to the department and no one's responsible for it. Yep. The contract administrator needs to be defined. And what are his duties? What's he going to do? When's he going to do it? If there's problems, who's he going to contact? And the same is true with the vendor. Who do we contact when we're having problems? Because the man sweeping on the back porch is probably not the person to solve problems. Mm-hmm. Those are my thoughts on mitigating problems. If you put the time in up front, yep, you probably have fewer problems later on. The problem we all have is taking that time up front.
Yeah, and the important part here, as Don and Charlie mentioned, it's really about having that discussion up front, right? The more you deal with all of that preparation up front, the less problems that you're going to have down the road. And by addressing those potential issues up front, and there's in any contract contracting process, there's usually about 6 or 7 different risks that you should be going through and analyzing those and understanding what are the potential risks with that particular contract, even with the solicitation process. And so making sure that we're addressing those different things, and we won't have time to address those here, but know that there are a number of risks that you have to think about and address with your project manager to make sure at the end that they're going to get a contract that they're going to be happy with and that they can support it and then implement and get their project done the way they had envisioned it. Anything last thoughts that you guys want to add? Great.
That's it.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. This is Radio NIGP.
Hi, I'm Christy
Hi.
Bardo. Welcome to Construction Junction. With me today is my new friend, Cynthia, and we're going to
Hello.
talk about procurements, contracts gone wrong in construction procurement. And, I know that, with construction, we're dealing with major dollars. These are not simple little bitty projects, millions and millions of dollars. And there's so many different areas where construction projects can go wrong. The nice thing with, at least with construction, is we have bonds, payment and performance bonds that we can call against to help probably get us through the project completion. But I just wanted to reach out because I know you said you had some experience with some construction projects that didn't quite go the way they should have. So can you just give us a little story about one of them and what happened and what you did to hopefully get it to a good resolution?
Sure. We have actually one that's wrapping up from having to file on performance bond. Two actually come to mind, but the main one was the one I'm thinking of was a park development. We were replacing playground equipment. It was in a FEMA zone, so we needed a contractor that understood grading and levels, and so we could follow that plan. And the other one I'm thinking of was a street improvement, bridge improvement project, and that one actually is almost back on track after filing on the performance bond as well. But that one, he went belly up, bankrupt. We didn't really have a choice but to file. The parks one, we went through months and months and months struggling with the contractor to get him on track, on schedule, perform work. The work was actually not done per standard, redo the work, and then ended up having to file on that bond as well. So
the struggles with the bonds, I know we call against the bond, but then it really affects our procurement cycle, doesn't it? Or our construction cycle?
It does. The construction cycle. Yes, it will definitely wreak havoc on your critical path. There is no longer a critical path at that point. Your time is now the surety's timeline. So what will happen is you will go through all your steps, your show causes, your cures, your written communication, mediations to get, before you get to that point, make sure you have all that documentation, because that surety is going to ask for all that. They want to look and do their own investigation. Who is at fault for the performance? Were the plans good? Were the specs good? Could the entity, the government entity had done something better? Were their communications well? So we have to give them all this information. They do an interview, they do an investigation, and then they determine what they're going to do. They have several options. You can do a takeover agreement where they take over everything, and then it's their bidder that they go out and get. You can do, they can say, you know what, we're just going to pay you out, and you can redo your process and start all over again. It's up to them what they decide they want to do, and it takes time. They aren't quick. So, yeah.
So thinking from a procurement standpoint, is there anything we can do to help prevent this or to maybe help mitigate this situation happening?
I think for both of these projects, even though the reasons we filed were very different, one of the main things, lessons learned going back, was a better low bid vetting process. Making sure you're asking all the questions. The one that actually went bankrupt, he was a very known vendor to this government entity I worked at, and they didn't really vet his references. Had they would have known he was already in financial trouble with other governmental entities, and they were already filing on those bonds. Right. So follow your standard vetting process, make it a thorough one, ask for supplier references, ask for surety references, ask for your sub references, ask for their capacity. What projects do you have going on? What projects are pending award? So that you can actually see what they are. We are here at the City of Plano actually just implemented financial reviews. So a new company or highly complex project, we'll ask for their financials and let our finance group tell us yay or nay, we have concerns or we don't. So a really good vetting process, and then communication, clear, precise communication. I think those two things, if you can have that, yep.
Yeah. That's great advice. Yeah. And we talk about it all the time. The sooner procurement's involved, the more we can help you as you go through your processes, no matter what kind of contract it is. But when you're dealing with millions and millions of dollars, it's really helpful to have build that rapport with your end using, as we call them, clients, not necessarily end users, our clients, and making sure that they know that we're there to support them. So
and we put into our solicitation a whole new section of experience qualifications specifically to that project. And then that's what they check references for. And procurement actually now will take that and look at those references and help guide them, because we want to make sure they're being done and they're being questioned correctly. So all different things you can do in your solicitation to help better prepare for that as well.
Wonderful. Well, I might have to get a copy of one of those from you before after this call. But thank you so much for your time today. And I want to encourage everyone to continue to watch Radio NIGP for the next segment of Construction Junction.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Legally Speaking. I'm Mike Beavis, and I'm joined today by Valerie Scott and John Walton, and we're going to be talking about termination today. Termination is one of those things that gets lawyers started, and it's hard to stop us. We spoke for almost an hour just getting ready for this 6 minutes, so we're going to give you in 6 minutes what we'd love to talk about all day with you. And to make it as high level as possible, I'm going to talk about 3 general types of termination. And then Valerie and John will talk about some more specifics about 2 key parts of that termination pattern. And to get to those general topics, when you're thinking about termination, we think about 3 general types of termination. One is termination by the terms of the agreement. So that might be that the term expires, right? The contracts for a year, for 2 years, for office supplies or whatever. Or it might be that something happens, like you don't get a federal grant or you don't get something else, and then the contract terminates because you don't have the money to pay for it. Or it might be, as we all know, about the non-funding option, right? If you don't get funding for the next year, then you could terminate, right? Under a provision of the clause. So that's one kind of termination. And that one we're not going to talk about that much because it depends on what the trigger is. It terminates based on the trigger occurring, right? The other 2 we have choices about, and they're a lot more fun, especially for the lawyers. And those are termination for cause and termination for convenience. And they both require that you follow some process, and they also designate some things that will happen after the termination occurs. So termination for convenience is what people sometimes think of as the easy one, although it's not really, and the straightforward one, although it's not really. But essentially, you can terminate a contract if you have a clause that covers termination for convenience for whatever reasons are in that clause. And usually it's vague and it's any reason at all, as long as it's not illegal. So you can terminate, for example, we did one in one jurisdiction I worked for where we had a clause in the contract about payment for use of tools. And the contractor was interpreting it very broadly, and we meant it very narrowly. They were billing us for a lot of stuff we didn't want to pay for. We couldn't come to an agreement, so we terminated for convenience, rewrote the contract, re-advertised it, and that same vendor won. But now they had to comply with a different clause, so they structured their payments differently, and it worked out. But in that case, we terminated for convenience for a couple of reasons. One is the contractor was performing okay. It was a problem with the contract. And 2 is we didn't mind if we got that contractor again because they were doing good work. Now, that's a problem people run into because they think about termination for cause and they do termination for convenience instead because they think it's easier, but they don't realize that if this bidder bids again, they could win. So that leads to termination for cause, which I like to think about as like firing somebody, right? A thing you have to document, but it's a termination that significantly creates damages, right? So you have the ability to go for damages and say, this contractor failed, and because they failed, we suffered damage and we get to collect money. Now, interestingly enough, if you terminate for convenience, you usually have to pay the contractor something for what they've done to date. So you have to think about it in those different ways, and you always have to read the clause that you've got, because there's going to be rules. There's going to be, you can terminate for convenience, but you have to give X amount of notice, or you can terminate for cause, but you have to give them a chance to fix it, which we'll call a notice to cure, or things like that. So you have to make sure you really understand the clauses and when you might want to use it. So Valerie, maybe you'd like to share with our listeners why you would use a termination for cause clause.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And I do like how you alluded to this being kind of like firing someone. You have to kind of have that mindset of there has to be something pretty serious. You need to have really good documentation and reason before you decide that you are going to terminate a contract for cause. And there are bigger consequences sometimes legally, I think, with this type of a termination, because if you get it wrong, you're going to end up in court. And you could end up in some sort of litigation if they think that you're wrongly terminating them for cause, which is why it's so important that you are documenting the reasons and you have solid backup and justification to be able to support this decision. Emails, dates, times, occurrences, what happened, and have that all together. And also make sure that you're engaging your legal counsel early in the process so that they can advise you through it, because it is serious and should not be taken lightly. And it's also serious for the contractor. So, for example, if this is a construction contract and you end up terminating it for cause, this is going to be something that is likely going to impact their surety, their bond rating, their ability to get future contracts if they have to report in their maybe responsibility data for other jurisdictions on their bids. Oh, yes, we have a termination for cause within however many years, and it does impact their business. And so it should be taken very seriously. And, sometimes, well, John will talk to this later with convenience, but I will say you should give them an opportunity to cure. So you should issue a notice to cure and give, ample enough opportunity for the contractor to resolve whatever the issue is. And if they can't, then you follow whatever procedures you have in place to move forward with a termination. But sometimes it's just people aren't getting along, and sometimes everyone just wants out of the contract as fast as they can, and you don't care about the compensatory damages you might be owed, and you just want to run far away and get out of that thing. And
Yeah.
in that case, maybe you do say, well, perhaps we could say this is a breach and we could terminate for cause, but maybe let's just negotiate our way out of this via a termination for convenience. So, John, what would you add about termination for convenience?
That's a fascinating sort of an idea to bring it up, that sometimes it's kind of clear, okay, cause is the stakes are really high. Somebody didn't perform. There's been some sort of damages. Mike was talking about termination for convenience. It can be kind of for any old reason that's in the best interest of the government. But you're talking about, well, hey, that maybe there's some judgment involved in here. Maybe one blends into the other. And I think that's absolutely right. You do sometimes get into a situation where you could go the high stakes termination for cause route. But the parties may decide, this is better off where we're just going to call it a termination for convenience, and we're going to negotiate some sort of an exit agreement between us. That's perfectly fine. The contract may even spell out a process like that, but usually not. A lot of times the termination for convenience clause says the government can terminate it if it's in its best interests, and it may stop right there. Now, it may go on and have more provisions to it, and often there should be more provisions to it, like who's going to pay who for what. We've all mentioned on this call that the contractor usually gets compensated under a termination for convenience if they have costs that are involved. If they have money that they've had to put out, it's only fair that they get compensated for that. They may also have negotiated with you either beforehand or when you're in the middle of the termination to say, talk about their profit margin too, and say, look, we just lost business. You should compensate us for that. That is something that is negotiable between the parties. There's also things like, what about work that's in progress? What about if it's halfway done? Do they deliver it to you in its halfway done shape? Probably the government wants that. It could be that the government wants a few little items actually completed. It could be that there's inventory or equipment that needs to be returned, or maybe there's some kind of intellectual property rights that need to be transferred from one to the other. So there's all sorts of other little details, but in any kind of termination, where you might want to spell out some of those other little rights. But I think our discussion is on the right track, where there's a big difference in the politics and the psychology of which type of termination we've got going on here.
Mm-hmm.
Termination for convenience is one that doesn't have the same high stakes consequences that follow a contractor for a long time. And if there aren't big damages, if you can just negotiate your way out of a separation, maybe termination for convenience is the way to go. Do you guys have anything you want to add to those two types?
I think what's important and what I'd like for people to think about is every time we talk about termination, we should be thinking about, as the procurement professionals and as we work with our clients, about what we do at the beginning, right? In other words, when we're doing the contract administration plan, when we're thinking about what could go sideways, are we building in clauses and figuring out what happens if we have to terminate for convenience? Are we willing to pay for stuff that's partially built? Are we willing to say we're going to do that in advance? Or what could be the causes, or what could be the natural occurrences that would terminate the contract, right? This is one of those things where you have to plan for it to go sideways, so it doesn't. It just goes the way you planned, right? Even if that wasn't what you hoped.
I agree. These termination clauses, they don't just exist in a vacuum. They're part of that bigger context that Mike's talking about. It's like, what's your plan B if you get out of this contract? Mm-hmm. Are you going to turn around and contract with somebody else? Can you contract with somebody else? Can you do it for cheaper, or is it going to cost twice as much? So thinking about the whole scheme of things and how a termination clause is just one type of remedy to help get out of a situation. But that's just one of those things. You're trying to mostly figure out how to keep the contract on track and make sure you get the results you want.
Yeah, and as you say that, I'm just thinking, oftentimes procurement is the reasonable voice at the table when emotions are running high, when project managers are pointing the finger at one another, and we have an opportunity to think ahead at the very beginning, what are the alternatives, and start them thinking that way as well. And in the heat of the moment when everyone's upset, we can be that voice of reason and really think through what is the best way out for this particular situation.
That's a beautiful way to put it, Valerie. This is just one technical piece of a big picture where we're trying to have the conversation with our internal clients and help them figure out, here's what we want to happen, here's what might go wrong, and here's how we might address it when it happens. So thanks, both of you, for talking about these different types of contract termination, how they fit into the big picture. I'm guessing that we're going to be back here in another month talking about some other little technical aspect of the big picture. In the meantime, hang in there and we'll see you all next month.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kirk Buffington with Radio NIGP, and I'm very happy to have with me today Charles Taylor, who is our Education Program Manager. And this is Charles' first interview on Radio NIGP, and I'm really excited to be the one who's conducting the interview. But good afternoon and welcome, Charles.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be on here. I'm a big fan of Radio NIGP. I've watched just about most of all of them. It's my first time on it, so I'm excited.
Oh, great. And we're a big fan of what you guys do up there, with content, education content, and the Pathways courses. And in particular, today we're going to talk about VCon and all things VCon. And I'm kind of doubly excited because this is the first year that I've been invited to participate. And I'm very excited about being able to bring a couple of sessions to the folks who register. So, Charles, if you would, tell us a little bit about the history of VCon.
We've had VCon for a couple of years, and I think originally VCon was in a position where it was going to be a virtual environment for folks that, maybe couldn't attend forum, but they could attend a virtual forum. And we played around with different topics for a couple of years. I think we ran with leadership topics. And then we
started to kind of move towards more foundation level topics for, those folks that are brand new to procurement. And as we've kind of ran VCon a couple of times, we started to notice that it really started to position itself really well, with VCon being something that's great for that foundation level, folks that are new to procurement. And then Forum is a little bit of everything, a lot of advanced content. And then we also have our leadership summit, which is, for our management and leaders and so forth. So between the three different events, I think they really started to kind of develop their own identity. And we are introducing something brand new to this VCon, which is going to be new to management. So those folks that are aspiring to be managers, brand new managers, or just want to look at the fundamentals of being management. This is something we're trying out this year, but we'll always think that VCon will be something that focuses on foundations.
That's great. And again, I'm doing a couple of sessions, and they are foundational type of sessions. And we both know there has been such a influx of newer folks into public sector procurement, and they've got great passion. They maybe come from the private sector, but they've got great passion, but they need to learn about as you say, the fundamentals of public procurement, which is way different from the private sector. Just a couple of ideas. What are some of the courses that you can think are really great to be on par this year? Anyone jump out at you besides mine?
I think we have a great topics. Just to read them off. So just with the foundation level, Stacy Gregg is going to be looking at post-war activities. Bobby Tolston's looking at some market research. And then if I come down here, Christy Varda, she's got a session. She's working a lot on contracts, which is an important element of procurement. And our very own Kirk Buffington. Let me see. He's got some UCC and also looking at some lowest bidder and managing risk. So there's a lot of great topics. So any given time, there's 3 sessions that are going on concurrently, and you can kind of pick and choose which session really speaks to you mostly.
And those other 3 folks you mentioned, Christy, Stacy, and I blanked out. Christy.
Yeah, we have Stacy Gregg, Bobby Tolston.
Bobby Tolston. Yeah. They're all are with me on Radio NIGP. And they are just amazing facilitators and great folks to learn from. So I'm just kind of honored to be on the same board as they are. So VCon is what dates?
Oh, a good question. So VCon is, let me double check here. And we're looking at May 8th and May 9th. So it's going to go in the afternoon. So we start at 12:30 and we'll end at 5 p.m. And we'll do that the same thing on the 9th. We'll start at 12:30 and we'll end at 9.
And those
end at 5, sorry.
And those are Eastern times, I assume.
Eastern time, yes.
Okay. And registration is open, obviously.
Yeah, registration's open. Yep.
Okay. Great. Well, Charles, this has been great. They just need to go to the NIGP website and click on events, and VCon will be right there.
Yes.
And I really look forward, as I said, to being part of this year. And anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, so the thing is that, all these sessions are recorded, so you can only attend one session out of the 3 every time that they're running, but all of them will be recorded and provided to you. And so I think for 90 days, I think is the date. I could be wrong on that, but you can go in and review those recordings. And at the end of each day, we'll be doing a raffle. So the raffle winner will win a ticket for a free virtual forum coming up. So We'll do one raffle at the end of day 1. And then on day 2, there's a panel where you have sessions you're going to attend. And the end of day 2 is giving you an opportunity for you to ask questions. And we'll have 2 panels, one for new to procurement and one for new to management. And each one of those panels will have a raffle, also providing a ticket for a free virtual forum.
Okay. Well, great, Charles. I really appreciate you taking a few minutes to talk today to our audience about VCon this year. Again, I'm really excited. I look forward to seeing everybody in May. And thanks again.
This is Charlie Rossell, Director of Procurement with Cleveland Metro Parks and a member of Radio NIGP. We have Tara Acton, who's also a member of Radio NIGP, and our good friend Carl Benito from Canada. He is the manager of purchasing and risk management for Northumberland County. And most recently, our good friend Carl was on the cover of the Supply Professional magazine. Congratulations, Carl.
Yes, congratulations.
Thanks.
Great accomplishment, my friend. The reason why we want to talk to you, this is awesome. You are a good friend of mine, a great colleague of both Tara and I. We do appreciate your friendship. But with this accomplishment, what was the main highlights of this magazine? What would you, if you had to talk to our members for an elevator pitch for 15 seconds, what would you tell the members of NIGP about this magazine? What was the benefit?
Yeah, it was when they approached me for the article, I wanted to really give it a touch of public procurement, and well as like volunteering and giving back as we do with the NIGP. Like you guys do this with Radio NIGP. So that was really the kind of the point I wanted to bring across, like my career, how procurement has given what is given to me and how I've been given back through all the things that I've been doing. I talked about a lot of that stuff throughout the article. So, you know, I don't know how in depth you want me to get, but it's really about like the work that we've done with NIGP, with the NIGP CPP, the volunteering I did as a chapter ambassador, and then my career path all the way through procurement and supply chain, starting from you know, manufacturing and then making my way into government and using all those experiences to kind of where I am today, and with everything I do in my workplace and with the NIGP through volunteering and advancing the profession.
But it was interesting to kind of read through your background before you entered public procurement. And then I think I've known that you sort of have this opinion, but reading in the article, and I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about sort of your drive and wanting to get more people interested in public procurement and how the switch to public procurement for you, like why it made sense to you to go from private sector into public sector. I don't know if you want to maybe talk about that a little bit more.
Sure. Like, so the transition was a big thing for me. Around the time that I did it was when we had that major economic downfall, to be quite honest. And that was a decision from a perspective of job security and pension and that kind of stuff. Because there was a lot of things going on in that 08, 09 years. And someone, actually one of my teachers through my professional designation that I have through in Canada here, he worked for the provincial government. That'd be the equivalent to state government in the US. And he said to me, have you ever thought about public procurement? And I never really did. We didn't really ever get told about the opportunities there. And so I started to kind of dig a little deeper and found out, wow, there's a whole area of supply chain procurement and other things that are related to what I've been doing in the past. So I applied to some positions and fortunately got the one that I'm in now and been here for 15, going on 16 years now. So the transition was good with the foundation of supply chain, because we do more than just procurement. We do a lot of stuff, right? We manage transportation, quality of goods, and quality of goods, and you know, just everything that kind of encompasses supply chain in what we call procurement. But we do more than just buy stuff, right? So that's kind of with me from my past, how I brought that into the public sector, right? And understanding those avenues and how we utilize them. Far too often we get placed in a one-dimensional position of purchasing or a buyer, right? And we do way more than that. And, you know, a background in supply chain was very helpful for that transition. Now, there was a lot of different things that when I came to the public sector were new to me. A lot of the competitive bidding we didn't do a lot of in the private sector. Working in automotive and sporting goods, we pre-established contracts. We did them, but not in the same context of what you do in public procurement. And then a lot of rules and regulations and, you know, not having the freedom to kind of do whatever you want, like you do in the private sector. In the public sector, there's a lot of rules and a lot of guidelines because it's all the ratepayers' money, right? It's public money that you're spending, so you got to really spend it, in a different manner and be very transparent. Where in private business, you do have to be transparent, but it's more about the profitability of the organization, right? And meeting those year end, month end, quarter end, year end, right, for the shareholders.
So, Carl, one of the things when you first started in public procurement, did you know who NIGP was?
Actually, I didn't know, but I was I was invited to be part of the Ontario Public Buyers Association, which is a chapter in NIGP. So indirectly, I knew, I was kind of involved. So literally like day 5, I'd say, like the first week, someone said, "Are you part of the Ontario Public Buyers Association?" So which is our one of the chapters of the NIGP, second largest chapter of the NIGP actually. And I started getting involved, and right away they actually connected me with somebody to mentor me and to kind of show me the ropes in public procurement, which was very helpful. He's now retired, but they allowed what the program was for me to be able to give him a call if I had a question. And I had a lot of questions. It was from the RFP process to evaluation criteria to all kinds of stuff, right? And so I would call him a few times a week and quick answer, then hang up. But that was important because you need that guideline, right? And someone to kind of mentor you through. So that's one of the things that I think about. I didn't talk about that much in the article, but someone that was willing to help me out drives me to want to help others because I definitely needed that assistance. So I know the NIGP has a lot of programs like that, like the mentorship program and the concierge program to kind of help you through education and stuff. But I think it's important that us as leaders, you, Tara, myself, give back in that way because it was so helpful to me being new in the profession. Just having someone to bounce a quick 2-minute call off of made your day go that much better.
If you were talking to a young professional or talking to somebody that's new to public procurement, new to NIGP, what advice would you give them about volunteering for not just potentially just, the chapter, but also volunteering and getting involved with NIGP?
Yeah, it's a good question, Charlie, because at the chapter level, it's kind of your gateway to the NIGP, right? It's really the grassroots part of everything, like being part of your chapter, going to meetings, being maybe part of the committees or councils or whatever it may be. And then there's the NIGP, which is kind of the way I look at it is like the umbrella, right? The umbrella over the other chapters. And when I got involved with the local chapter, it was my introduction into being in an organization. And then I was introduced into the NIGP, and one of my mentors said, "You should go to Forum." And actually, what's funny, the funny story is that he was at a master certificate program with my CAO and chief administrative officer, and said to her, "Carl needs to go to Forum." So she came back and she said, "This guy from one of the major cities says you need to go to this." I was like, "Okay." So I got the budget and I was allowed to go. But you need that support, right? They need to get somehow into that leadership to allow individuals to get support to be part of the organization. Then came meeting people at Forum and getting more involved, which then led to volunteerism, right? So, but part of the drive of volunteerism was that building that network for the public procurement area, to be able to have someone to call when you have a question. Or one of the biggest things is when I even get a reference for a software program or something, they say, "Oh, they use that over in Cleveland Metro Parks," and I'm like, "Oh, okay." And Charlie, do you use this program? Right? I can call you, or I can call someone I know across the U.S. and say, "Oh, I've met them once at a conference," or "We have a connection through the NIGP." I'm able to connect, and my workplace thinks that's just phenomenal. They just can't get over how many people I know in the procurement world. Everybody I talk to is always like, "How do you know somebody in Los Angeles?" Or how do you know somebody in, New York or whatever? And it's just such a great thing. It's all brought brought by way of volunteerism, like meeting all these connections in every committee or council that I've been part of, really is part of who I am in my profession. And I wouldn't have that without volunteering. So it's a benefit for me and for the organization. It's kind of a win-win. So that's kind of why I talk about volunteering being so important, because it can really kickstart you in your career, and also it can make you a more rounded professional, right? Because you have those resources to always call on for either a document or a question or just even some advice, right? Like there's all kinds of people I'm sure I've called you guys before for some advice, right? So I think it's really important that you build that, but that gateway is through volunteerism.
We're in this weird area where people are retiring that have been in this field for 15, 20 years, and we don't have a bench that's ready to replace them. There's not people that are going to school to learn public procurement. They might have supply chain or business related. So what's advice that you would give to somebody who's either looking for a career like that might lead them into procurement, or maybe someone who's stumbled into it but is just now starting their career? What kind of advice would you share with them?
Talk to people that work in the profession, because it's far too often we want to do something but never research it or talk to somebody that actually does the job. Public procurement professionals, most people, I mean, not everybody, but most people really enjoy what they do. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a profession where we actually enjoy what we're doing. I've talked to a lot of other professions, and a lot of my other friends don't enjoy it as much as I do. And I have a story of a friend of mine, a really close friend, and he was in, I think it was sales, and we met for lunch one day, and he was just so down. He was like, I got to get out of this. I got to get into another kind of profession. And I said, why don't you come to do what I do? He goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, procurement. He goes, well, what makes us? Why are you so happy? What's so great about your job? And I said, well, I mean, I just enjoy doing what I do. It's something different every day. It's not the same thing. I really enjoy, different projects, the variety of things that we do, the ability to go in different directions and different agencies and kind of still be doing the thing that we like to do most, is make a difference in your community, right? And if I know I'm making a difference in my community, to me, that's a driver, because, like I think in the article I talked about fire stations and paramedic stations. Like, to me, I drive by it and I'm like, wow, I was part of that project. That's going to be there a long time.
That's my fire department.
Right? And you can tell people that I was part of that project, which is, I was super proud of. But like when I worked for other organizations, not that I wasn't proud of the vehicles and the other stuff that I was doing. It wasn't the same, right? It wasn't actually direct impact to someone's everyday, right? Like someone has to, there's an emergency all the time where the fire department gets called and they have to come out of that building, or that road that we drive on. I was part of that project, or the long-term care facility that we're building now. That's $100 million that I'm huge part of that whole procurement, right? So, and building all the intricacies inside of it for someone to actually, they're a resident of that home. So that's what I would say is, depending on kind of what you want out of your career, for me, that's rewarding. And I think it'd be a good direction for someone to go into that wants to have something to talk about later on in life that was rewarding for them.
All right. Well, then if we don't have anything else to add, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us, Carl. Congratulations. I think it's a huge accomplishment. And I love it when I see people that do amazing things and usually do it under the radar, when there's an opportunity to kind of shine a light on all of the things that they do. This couple-page article, I think it summarizes, it just is like the tip of the iceberg of the things that you work on and the things that you do. And I appreciate being able to share it with everyone else. So thank you for that. And to our radio NIGP listeners, thank you for tuning in and listening. And I hope you got something out of it.
Thanks. Bye.
Hello, and welcome to Radio NIGP. I'm Christy Varda, and I'm here for Tech Talk for April. And the April show is about procurement gone wrong. With me today, I have our new friend, Julie, who's going to talk a little bit about us. But Julie, before we start talking about the topic, introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Julie. I work for Johnson County Community College. I'm a senior buyer with an emphasis in information technology procurements.
Wonderful. So, Julie, like I said, procurement gone wrong. So thinking about technology procurements, and we have, technology's changed so much in the years. We used to get the whole floppy disk back in the day, and now we're doing cloud procurements. So when we think about technology procurements, what things could go wrong or cause a technology procurement to go wrong? I mean, where would we find that? What areas that would happen?
I would say a large majority of things that cause the procurement to go wrong is communication. I mean, pretty much everything stems from communication, either the lack of or the assumptions made or implied or intended. You know, I think when I think back on previous projects I've had where there have been significant issues, it could stem from not clearly defining what features and functionality you need. You know, what's intended, what they envisioned are all nice and good, but, you know, with your technical staff, they cannot necessarily articulate well. They just know they need this product. Here are 5 bullet points, go buy it. Well,
yeah. Exactly. Well, you know, and so you talk about the communication that really starts even earlier in the planning of it. You know, like you said, knowing what you want. Another area I seem to find that tends to be the one major failure point is during implementation. Mm-hmm. What do you think of that?
Well, not having the right resources or sufficient resources. We're all have heavy workloads, and all of a sudden this project's dumped in your lap to implement it, and you know you're doing your normal job plus this new assigned task, and you know if they don't have a project manager, or if their project manager is not good at communicating,
right?
You know, there's so many points in the implementation process, like defining workflows. If you don't have the right people stepping up and saying, this is how it needs to work within my job, you know, again, you'll just be thrown a piece of software and here, just figure it out. And without that hardcore planning, the understanding of the impacts of, you know, a lot of times their software can't change to suit you. You need to change your procedures to suit the software.
Business practices.
Yeah. And if that's not communicated well from the get-go, you got a lot of disgruntled employees.
Absolutely. And I've seen that. I've actually been, I've come into an organization right after something's been implemented. I've also been the procurement lead implementing a new ERP. So I do understand that having the right people in the room. So if you were to think of one thing that procurement could do better to help everyone have a successful technology procurement, what would you do? What would you say to do?
Oh boy, I would have to say do as much on the front end as possible. You know, when that initial project is in the planning stages, and even before the RFP is issued, is sitting down with all the people that are going to be majorly affected, that need to have buy-in on the new IT project, and just talk through what the objectives are, what you hope to have as outcomes. Talk about, you know, how it needs to fit within your environment and what are the relevant pieces and parts of that system and how it's going to integrate and work with other systems, work within your processes, and just have a really thorough understanding of, okay, not only are we buying this system, but you know, it's going to affect this other system. It's going to require a need for hardware, for resources, for all the things that's going to have to make this project successful, is making sure everyone's on the same page and the same understanding going into the project and what the level of effort it's going to be. And then when you're in the evaluation stage, having that solid foundation will help you better evaluate the impacts of the different proposed solutions. Now, a lot of people on the evaluation team are probably not going to be sound, you know, IT experts, but you got to have those experts on the team to educate everybody else to say, okay, I know you like the look of this one and it has really pretty bells and whistles, but the way it integrates or interfaces with your other systems is going to cause these type of processes or time lags or whatever incompatibility issues that you need to take into account and make sure that you're okay with that. And that way it leads then ultimately when an award is made, there's not as much disgruntlement, not as much as disappointment in that outcome, because everybody knows, communicated well, what needs to occur and what is the expectations of the outcome.
Well, you couldn't have answered those better if you tried a second try. Julie, this was awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your wonderful answers. You hit it spot on everything in regards to what we were thinking about when we're talking about technology procurement. So thank you once again for joining us on this month's episode of Tech Talk.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Hello and welcome to Radio NIGP. This is Bobby Tolston, and we are attending the Deeper Dive Make a Splash segment. I have here one of my favorite colleagues and a member of Radio NIGP, Penny Owens. Hello, Penny, and welcome to Radio NIGP, Deeper Dive Making a Splash. How are you today?
I'm great, Bobby. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Penny, I'm pretty much familiar with you, but some of our listeners may not be. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am the purchasing agent at the city of Knoxville in Tennessee. I've been here about 16 years and have about 30 some years. Will not give the exact number in public procurement. So I manage all things here procurement related, and of course have been a chapter pastor in the past for NIGP and serve on the NIGP consulting team. And I'm happy to be here with you today.
Well, thank you so much. It sounds like you keep yourself a little busy there, huh?
Yeah, a little bit.
Just a little. So Penny, the topic of discussion today is contracts go bad. So I'd like for you to share an experience with our listening audience on a contract that you worked on in some capacity that went bad. So tell us about this contract. Tell us what went wrong, what was the outcome, and what could you have done differently? And what are some lessons learned? So let's take that one bite at a time. So first, if you want to go ahead and tell me about the contract first.
Great. So we had a contract. It was actually for a re-roofing of one of our facilities. It was actually one of our recreation centers. And we hired a company we had used in the past through an invitation to bid, of course. And we had a plan. The work was to start in October. The plan was to get the roof torn off and then kind of re-roof through the month of December and be complete at the end of December. Unfortunately, that didn't quite go the way planned. So we had, they did take the roof off and then they went through two sets of subcontractors, both walked off the job by the end of December. By the end of January, our contractor was no longer responding. We had even tried to invoke liquidated damages, and being in January in Tennessee with no roof on a facility meant we ended up with a lot of damage, a lot of water damage. It ruined our gymnasium floor. It ruined the walls, the bleachers. We had to do mold remediation. We really ended up having to do a pretty big remodel at the end of the process.
Oh my.
Yes, we did have, and it seemed like we did, most everything right. We had a great project manager on it who was staying on top of the contractor. Mm-hmm. We had bonds. So fortunately, we were able to pull the performance bond on that to get the work completed. We had insurance, so which came in helpful because the bond, of course, finished the work, but it did not help with all the damage that was done. So we did invoke the we pursued the insurance coverage. We had great documentation. So when it came time to work with the surety to pull the bond, we were able to provide all of our evidence that we had taken all the steps and tried to pursue every avenue we could to finish the job successfully. So we, at the end of the day, it was really funny. We, as I said, it was a contractor we had used. We knew him. He had done a lot of work similar size or bigger. But in what we learned, it sounded like it just really came down to the subcontractors. One thing we didn't do was ensure that we approved reassignment of the subcontractors. So there is a clause in our contract that says we have to approve, a substitution. That did not happen. We have learned our lesson from that, of course, but that was probably our downfall. And then the other thing I think we have learned is that even though we had a project manager keeping an eye on the project, that project manager also had a lot of other projects going at the same time. So we did not know, from day to day who was on site. And I think that would have given us a little more insight into what was happening on the project.
Wow. When you talk about a contract that went bad, that one went bad. Right.
It went really bad. We actually, that particular rec center, we had ongoing programs. It was basketball season. We had an after school program. So we ultimately had to provide transportation to take children from that one to another one. Yes. So it went very badly.
I'll say. So in conclusion, I heard some things that you said that you, some lessons learned from the experience. Can you enumerate a couple of things for our audience, what you would have done differently?
Absolutely. Things we would still do the same, of course, is that we did have the bonds. We required both payment and performance bonds. And actually on that particular project, we had them at 100%. And we've had discussions since then about, we were glad we had them at 100% because if you're going to fully take off a roof or fully take off a deck off of a bridge, you're going to be stuck right there, potentially, and you would need that 100% bond. Might be instances where you could go less than that, but in that case, we were glad we did that. Of course, having the insurance, having liquidated damages in our contract language, and then having that clause and the project manager making sure that the subcontractors are not being reassigned without your approval, vetting those subcontractors better, and then better insight into what is actually going on the project.
Wow. Great takeaways. And one of the things that I think we both have learned in our career is that you can't have too much oversight over a big project, right? And correct. Sometimes I think maybe we should have a primary and an alternate project manager for that reason, right? Sometimes that they're overwhelmed, but what if they have to leave and go off on an emergency? That project is kind of left. So having the thought of maybe having a primary and secondary project manager, similar to the way we have primary and secondary contractors, may be something for us to think about going forward. So thank you. That was a great story to share about a contract that went bad. So I'll share a really quick story. So we had a hauling contract, and the contractor was to haul attenuators. We had purchased 2 of them, and we figured that we would have one for the north side of the county and one for the south side. We did a solicitation to hire haulers to haul the attenuators, and we figured that we would hire 2. That we would alternate the 2. Well, one of the contractors was an existing contract. So the team that was responsible for alternating the contractors continued to call the one that they were familiar with and not the newer contract. Well, 6 months into the contract, the new contractor contacted us to say that they hadn't been used in 6 months. Well, we were surprised in procurement that this happened. So we called contractor in along with the team to say, hey, what's going on? And the team, of course, feigned ignorance, like, oh, we didn't know we were supposed to do that. We thought we had a primary and a secondary, which is different. How you manage it. We made it very clear that they were to alternate. Well, a couple of months later, the contractor called another meeting to tell us that their vehicles were in the process of being repossessed. We were very surprised that their vehicles were being repossessed because in the solicitation, we specifically asked for a list of their vehicles with the VIN numbers, the color. We asked for probably about 4 things. So we were surprised that they said that their vehicles were being repossessed. Well, what we learned was that they went and purchased new vehicles once they got the contract. And they used the purchase order, which it was the contract was a IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, because we didn't know how often we were going to use it. So we had an upset limit on the purchase order. They used that upset limit and took it to the bank to say that they had a contract for that amount. And they purchased 4 brand new vehicles. And when they didn't get work for 8 months, they weren't able to make the payment. They eventually tried to sue us for a breach of contract to say that we reneged on the contract. And we got legal involved. They got their attorney, but we ended up having to terminate their contract for convenience and re-advertise. Well, what we learned from that experience was to ask for more information in the solicitation as it related to the vehicle, the type, the make, the model, the year, the number of miles on it. We asked we had like 20 things when we re-solicited to make sure that we didn't put ourselves in that situation. But the contractor that was the previous contractor, they ended up after 2 years on the contract saying that they didn't make as much money as they had hoped. So they wanted us to terminate them for convenience. We was like, no, this would be default. No, it was an IDIQ. You knew that there was no definite amount or number of hauls that you would do when you went into this. So it was one of those contracts that you say, I was glad it was over when it was over.
So, Bobby, I know you mentioned it being an IDIQ. Did you have language in there that said there was no guarantee of even a minimum or? Okay.
Yes, because it was our first contract. We said that this was the first contract. We really had no history of how many hauls would be needed because these attenuators were needed when we had water main breaks. You can't predict water main breaks, right? You can say that they may happen in the winter, but we have them happening all year round, right? Winter makes them break faster, but you can get a water main break when it isn't cold outside. So we were very clear about that. We even talked about it. We had a pre-bid meeting. We talked about it. And that is why we termed it an IDIQ, because we didn't know. Our plan was to use that contract to develop a historical record so that when we did another solicitation, we would be a little better on our estimate, or we could say in the past year we did this amount, but we didn't have that. And they were aware of that because they were a hauler for another contract that we had. It wasn't for the attenuators, but we had haulers like for gravel and for other things like that. So they were aware.
Interesting. We are required, it's an internal requirement to put kind of a not to exceed amount on our agreements. And I think sometimes our contractors get that confused with that other clause that says there's no minimum guarantee of any amount of work that we will do or quantity or, and that's, I think we've learned in the past, we've had to be very specific about that.
Yes. And the purpose of having a pre-bid meeting is to get all of those questions out. And if my memory serves me correctly, we got quite a number of questions about it because it was so new. So we really felt that we did our due diligence. We felt that we were transparent in the whole process, but it just did not, the intentions that we had, the results didn't show our intent for sure.
Right.
So to sum it up, Penny, I would say that our lessons learned from contracts going bad ensure to request information, as much information as possible, specifically for vehicles, including VIN numbers, color, year, make, model, miles, anything that would make it better for the agency to make an informed decision. Include performance and payment bonds in case of contractor defaults. Ensure the correct solicitation methodology is used. We thought that going forward, as we debriefed, that a request for a proposal methodology may have been better than an invitation for bid because there were other criteria that we needed to consider. And document issues by the project and contract managers, because if something happens, as it ultimately does, lack of documentation really can make a difference between your agency if it goes to court, winning or not winning.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Penny, for joining me today for a deeper dive. I'd like to thank our radio audience for staying tuned. I hope you have some good information that you can take back with you to your organization. And this has been a deeper dive. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you back here again real soon. Take care.
Hello, on Chapter News today, I have Art Moore from IAPO, the Illinois chapter of NIGP, to talk about when contracts go wrong for your chapter. Hello, Art. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we are glad to have you. Wish it was going to be a better story that you get to share today. But can you tell us a time about when your chapter was in a contract with somebody and it did not go well for you?
Yes, I wish it was better circumstances as well. But unfortunately, a lot of times we learn better through trials and tribulations. So one contract in particular was a venue contract. The association was looking for a new venue for one of our conferences. And when we went through the contract, looked at the items, had discussions, we felt like we were at a place of understanding and knew where we were going based on what some of our previous agreements were like. So the agreement was written similar to past agreements, but we soon found out that that was not necessarily the case. So once we got to the actual conference itself, probably a week out when you're doing the food order, they told us that the breakfast that we were getting ready to provide to our chapter members was not included in the food and beverage minimum. And it was a rather high food and beverage minimum. And they tried to tell us that we would then have to compensate for where we were deficient in that food and beverage minimum. We tried to point out that this was not told to us up front, that it was food. So who would not assume that the food that you're buying from the hotel was not included in the food and beverage minimum? And they told us that, well, the breakfast that we had chosen was provided by a third party venue. And since it was third party, it didn't count towards the food and beverage minimum. We then said, look, we have more rooms than what our minimum was. So there's an attrition rate at this hotel. And they tried to tell us, well, no, each bucket is its own bucket and you can't add the numbers together to get to the minimums. And we then successfully pointed out, because, we all have some lawyers as part of our associations, that the final line that talked about damages actually included the totality of what the minimum revenue the hotel was supposed to receive. So we were able to successfully point out that the revenue from the overnight stays could offset the food and beverage minimums. But then we had to scramble to provide more hors d'oeuvres at our social events. We actually did a happy hour just so that we can get to that food and beverage minimum, because in our opinion, we didn't want to just give chapter money away. If we've got to meet those minimums, then we're going to do so by giving something back to the chapter. And then the wonderful Wi-Fi. I mean, it made it seem like they were going to provide us Wi-Fi in the room, but then again, once again, we find out that the Wi-Fi is being provided by a third party, and that if we wanted the quicker Wi-Fi to handle all of the attendees, that we would have to go through the third party vendor. So these are some of those nuances that we've never experienced before. It was always part of the contract. There was nothing in the contract that said Wi-Fi would have to be provided by the third party vendor. So what it did is it got us asking different questions. As procurement professionals, we're always backing up and saying, what could we have done differently? So when we went out for a new contract, needless to say, that was a one-time only, and we were going to choose a new venue. So what we did was we started to identify questions that we asked. So when we went to look at some of the new venues, we would say, what AV and Wi-Fi is being provided by the third party vendor, and what AV and Wi-Fi is being provided by the hotel. And we specifically asked them to put that in their quote. So if it's going to be more money, let us know. We also want to know what is included in food and beverage minimums. So for example, the thought process is that we have learned now, if you have an on-site restaurant or a Starbucks, which we actually are going to have in our upcoming fall conference, hate to put the plug in, but if you have venues like that are third-party venues that are housed on site, they don't count towards food and beverage because the hotel is not receiving that direct revenue stream. So it really gave us that question. So now when we go in, we say, is this a third-party vendor or is this hotel catering? I mean, so that really has become one of our nuanced questions now, and a learning lesson that we learned from our fall conference.
Wow, that's a lot of stress. You're already planning a conference and then to have that contract not go well. It sounds like you've learned a lot from that. It would be helpful also if you could maybe potentially put it on Insight, all of those questions that you know to ask. So anyone listening can actually have those as well. I think that would be helpful if you are willing to do that.
And yes, absolutely. I think one of the things a learning lesson too is to know your area. I mean, that's something that we're definitely learning because our state is large. So the nuances downstate are not as strict as those in, for us, the Chicagoland area. So know your area, know some of the do's and don'ts of your area, team up with a local visitors bureau, because a lot of times they know the questions to ask, and they actually will serve as kind of like your third party facilitator and will answer some of your questions for you and kind of tell you, oh, this is what you want. You need to ask this question. And then sometimes they'll actually step in and say, okay, I know that they want this. How do you do that? Oh man, I forgot about that. So just get a partner that knows the business. We're not experts at everything. I always call it find you an end user to help you procure what you're looking for. So I hate to use that as an example of what we would do as a chapter, but I would advise the same concept. Get you a subject matter expert and have them help you.
Love that. So is the questions that you ask when you're planning a conference in Chicagoland different than the questions you're asking when it is somewhere else in your state?
We used to, yes, but now not anymore, because for me, I want to make sure we get the answers. So even if it's just commonplace, for example, on our spring conference, a lot of the questions we're asking are just kind of commonplace. And the food and beverage minimums are usually non-existent. They just don't allow you to bring outside food, and then you don't even have an attrition plan on your hotel. So, I mean, it makes it a lot easier when you're not trying to figure out how to get it to a minimum number. In Chicagoland, every hotel has some kind of attrition policy or food and beverage minimum. And, that's part of it. We always talk about life cycle costing and procurement. When you start thinking about your hotel, you got to start thinking about that. Yes, your room only cost you $500, but you had a $20,000 food and beverage minimum. You got to look at that, and you got to factor in what is actually, whether if you're going for lower cost or you're trying to be cost efficient, what really gets you to that. So, I mean, those are just the questions that you have to ask and look at. And that's why I say really look at your venue and the area that you're going to.
Yeah. Don't forget to put on your procurement hat when you're planning a conference, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sharing your story today. And hopefully there are some lessons learned for all of the other chapter leaders out there. Thanks.
Thank you.
We see it all the time, right? News articles that speak on the decisions that procurement offices made. And then when we start reading and digging, we see, well, maybe they made the right decisions. Maybe they shouldn't have chosen the lowest bidder because they issued an RFP. Maybe the contract was a legitimate sole source or emergency, and we could not get competition or the same competition that we would have gotten in any case. Sometimes the news doesn't get it right. And sometimes what they don't understand is that procurement officers have resources at play, processes at play that helps us to get the best value and the best bargains for our communities, right? For instance, what if we use a cooperative agreement? Isn't that strategic sourcing? Isn't that us getting the best deal that we can for our taxpayers? Can that go wrong? Yes, it can. And that's what happened in Sarasota. Basically there was a report where researchers sought out to find out what their practices were. The county hired NIGP consultants to find out if their practices were acceptable because of some things that happened. And what these contractors found was that they kind of overused some of these strategic sourcing measures, and it created a problem. They ended up taking what was very good practices, like cooperative agreements, and exploiting them so that it wasn't. Now, I don't want to speak too much on this because the consultants that actually perform the work are very respected colleagues of ours, and I want to make sure that I honor the work that they had. But I'll tell you that you can go out and find these articles in the newspapers. Sarasota County. This happened back in early 2000s, 2011, like right at the beginning of that decade, where it started. And one of the examples is that they were using a piggyback contract, which ordinarily can be good. It may not be. The thing here is that you want to make sure that your entity can bear it before you go out using some of these practices. And this was when we first started talking about co-ops. And this was not a cooperative. It was basically a piggyback. Somebody awarded a contract and then a whole bunch of other locals used it. I don't know what it said to whether or not it was good. Another practice that they were doing was pulling together different procurements or different needs to make one big procurement, which again can be a strategic sourcing method. But what happened was the people who were researching it, the NIGP folk, what they found out was that they were restricting competition. And they were also opening the door for fraud and collusion. So I bring all of this up to say to you, please, 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 please. We're nearing the end of the fiscal year. We're coming up to the summer. We're, in university land, we start slowing down a little bit. We slow down to pick up, to slow down to pick up. Use this time to take a good look at your practices to make sure that they are good practices and best for your entity, because it can go wrong. And I read a quote that said that the person who actually did the report, he said, I know I tell you all the time that people screw up, but these people take the cake. You don't want to take the cake. You want to do the right thing. And I'm sure these people wanted to do the right thing as well. So again, good contracts can go wrong. Take a good look at your processes. Make room for contingencies, because sometimes we just can't get to them in time. But make sure that everybody's on the up and up, and go out and find these articles. It's so interesting. I collect them and I keep an arsenal of them just to kind of remind myself of anything that can happen in procurement that could go wrong, because I might look good in Carolina Garnet, go Gamecocks, the day after a national championship for Dawn Staley, but I'll definitely never look good in orange. Thank you so much.
This month, we're focusing on the area of contract administration and specifically on how to avoid a problematic situation with contracts that we administer. And today, I'm very honored to have as my guest, Carrie Mathis, who's our esteemed NIGP Governing Board Chair. So, Carrie, welcome to Way to Grow.
Hi, Keith. Thanks so much for having me as part of your segment today.
Well, I'm honored. So, Carrie, let's do a little bit of role play exercising here. Let's imagine that you're a mentor, or in your capacity as director, and one of your mentees or employees comes to you and tells you that the performance of the vendor on one of their most critical contracts is suddenly deteriorated to a point where they're no longer properly performing. What advice would you give that mentee and or employee? Who would you recommend they contact in this situation?
Sure, that's a great scenario, Keith. I think it's one that we run up to quite frequently as procurement practitioners. I think I would start my advice to them by first having a conversation with the user department who first identified the performance deficiency. I think that engaging with them will allow the opportunity to hear firsthand what those challenges are that they're experiencing with the contracted vendor and what specific portions of the scope they feel are deficient. And so I think that that's a really important key, because there are times when a presumed deficiency is not actually within the scope of the contract. And so we need to really be clear on the parameters of the contractual obligation. During that discussion, I would also encourage an inquiry of any direct communication that the end user has had with the contracted vendor regarding deficient performance and what, if any, remedies were discussed. I'd also encourage that if the user department had not sufficiently documented the performance deficiencies, that they do so and provide that documentation to the procurement office. So it's critical that procurement be informed as quickly as possible when performance deficiencies occur, so that we have the opportunity to engage with the contracted vendor to notify them in an attempt to resolve any of those deficiencies as quickly as possible. That documentation piece is so critical and yet oftentimes is lacking. And there may be a reluctance from the end user to document and formally put the contracted vendor on notice for fear that it may cause the relationship to deteriorate even further. But as procurement professionals, we understand the responsibility of ensuring fairness to our contracted vendors and giving them the opportunity of having proper notice of the deficiencies, allowing them to be able to cure and provide a written plan to mitigate against reoccurrence in the future. We simply can't address what we're not made aware of, and so that documentation is really key.
That's so true. And you actually hit upon the point of my next question. So I've heard that you learn so much from your mistakes, but it's so much better to learn from the mistakes of others. When you do that, you be better prepared to cope with future issues. And after knowing you for many years, I can't think of anybody I know who embodies the principle of preparedness and planning more than you do. So let me ask you this. What recommendations would you make to avoid a contract going bad in the first place?
Thank you, Keith. I think establishing a good working relationship with the contracted vendor as soon as possible after contract execution is really important. After all, we're partnering with them for really what could be many years. Depending on how many term renewals we have on the contract, we could be in partnership with them for 3, 5, or maybe even more years than that. And so we should be proactive to create an environment for success for both parties. So consider scheduling a kickoff meeting where procurement and the end user department meet in person with the contracted vendor. That not only facilitates introductions with key representatives and points of contact, but it really also allows that opportunity to have a great discussion surrounding the contract itself, the performance expectations, how and to whom any concerns will be addressed, if there are communication protocols, meeting schedules, deliverables, deadlines, any unique factors that surround the contract. Starting off with a collaborative meeting, I think, sets a really good tone, and it also reaffirms the expectations so everybody is on the same page going forward into the contract itself. So consider, Keith, what we do when we have new employees that join our team. We are intentional to onboard them and help them to acclimate. And so contracted vendors certainly are part of our team as well, and we should be doing a part to prepare for them for their success as well. I think taking the time to meet and engage is a solid strategy that really can help to mitigate against misunderstandings. That's not to say that there won't be any misunderstandings or challenges throughout the term of the contract. I think we need to be realistic with that. But if we engage with them early and explore what those expectations are and set those communication protocols, we will have a better understanding of how those challenges will be addressed in an attempt to resolve them sufficiently should they occur in the future.
I couldn't agree with you more, Carrie. Thanks for that great advice as always. So, well, that's just about it for this month's segment. So, Carrie, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me here today. And as always, I want to remind everybody in our audience that you can find the NIGP Mentorship Program, as well as their mentorship Facebook page at www.nigp.org/mentorship. And so now, this is Keith Glatt speaking, and hoping that you'll join me very soon here on Radio NIGP for our next segment of Way to Grow, and reminding you that this is Radio NIGP.
Hello, friends. As you well know, and as we have talked about today, sometimes contracts go bad. In a perfect scenario, we as procurement professionals have done everything we could to prevent this from happening, but sometimes it simply can't be avoided. That being said, the more you plan, the less likely you are to find yourself in this situation. So do not take acquisition planning and market research too lightly. Do your homework. Identify the various risks in the proposed contract and look for ways to mitigate them. Look for similar contracts in place at other entities and ask them for their lessons learned. What worked well and what would they do differently? Bless our hearts. We don't need to repeat someone else's mistakes. It's much better to learn from them and ask the questions. But let's address the scenario when your best efforts are unsuccessful and your contract is on life support. What can you do? Well, first and foremost, don't lose your focus or your wits. Instead, focus on 3 Ps. Be proactive and do what you can to get in front of the issue and contain it. Be positive and look for creative solutions to resolve the issues. And lastly, remain professional. Remember, this is not personal, and pointing fingers and looking for blame isn't going to help anyone. Identify the issues and truly look for ways to resolve them as best you can. It can be challenging for logic to prevail when you find yourself in an emotional situation. So keep the main thing as the main thing and do what you can to resolve, maintain, and restore your relationship and salvage your contract as best you can. It can be tough, but that is part of what makes we as procurement professionals and adds value to what we do. We make the most of every opportunity we're given to learn and excel in both the good and the bad. So until next time, friends, stay positive and keep on making that magic happen.
Hello, my name is Barb Johnson, and I'm on staff at Radio NIGP, and I'm coming to you on this broadcast because test taking is in the air. And so we were looking for timeless test preparation and test taking tips. And one of the people who I am familiar with for this type of information is Ms. Linda Allaire. So welcome, Linda. What do you have for us today about yourself and about preparing for the tests?
Well, hello, Barb. It's great to be here with you. And I'm glad to share this kind of stuff with people because people hate taking tests. They just do. I did when I was taking them and still when I take them. So I've got a lot of years as a procurement person. I'm an instructor with NIGP, obviously, because both you and I do the B and the O prep classes. And I've done a number of them. And during COVID, people were, taking training and then getting their certification because everything went remote and it was easier to do rather than, the old standard of doing the face-to-face classes and the added expense. So I've come up with a bit of stuff that I share with students during a prep class. And not just NIGP prep classes for the UPPCC certification, but this works for the NIGP CPP exam as well, which I took back during COVID. And I also share this with my university students because taking a test is taking a test, right?
Right. And preparing for one is preparing for a test. What can you share with us? You've had a number of successes with your students.
It's like everything we do in procurement, right? The preparation is the bedrock of the whole thing. So obviously, if you're going to take an exam of any kind, whether it's a certification exam for procurement or logistics certification or ISM, the Institute of Supply Management in the US or whatever, taking a test is taking a test. But being prepared to take it, that includes things like studying, but it also includes things like networking with other people who are about to take it because they'll come up with questions or bounce ideas off of you. If you take a prep class, you have a built-in study group because you've been with those people for a couple of days talking about the content. And quite often you'll find there are people in the class that have more experience in one area that you may not feel as comfortable in. So those are folks you can bounce ideas off of. So taking the prep class is the first thing. Having that study group, whether it's the people that are in the class or your colleagues at work, assuming that you're not a one-person shop, and taking the opportunity to actually leverage David Nash's question of the day. I have directed every student in a class to sign up for David's question of the day, and they have come back afterwards and said, you know what, I've done the other sample tests that were available, and they were good, but his questions were so comprehensive and covered a broad spectrum with the same question design as what they'll see on the exam. And the feedback that he gives, you don't get that in just a sample test. He provides the feedback about why that question has that particular correct answer versus why the other ones aren't as appropriate. So that's a feedback loop that is really critical in people preparing, in my view.
Anything else for preparation?
Preparation goes through a whole continuum. So there's the getting ready for the exam. doing the study group, doing the sample tests, doing the studying and that sort of stuff. But in preparing for the test as well, if you're going to a testing center, it's sometimes a little disconcerting, even though the information is provided or should be provided by the instructors in the prep classes about what to expect when you get to the testing center. It's a little disconcerting when you get there and find out that, for example, you have to take off your glasses so they can look at them.
Wow.
You can't wear a sweater. Now, they provide little lockers, like what you used to have in gym class back in the day, to put your stuff in. But don't take anything extra with you that you don't absolutely need. If you have medication that you need to keep handy, like an EpiPen or a rescue inhaler, take that in with you, but they will ask to inspect it. They'll just look at it, and I don't know if they think there's a little camera on it or what, but they'll look at it and make sure. The same with your glasses. They'll make you take them off. Don't wear jewelry, like bare minimum. You're dressed. You don't need pens. You don't need pencils. They supply all that. Do not take a calculator. It can't go in with you. Don't take a notepad. They provide the paper. So it's just you dressed to be out in the public and nothing extraneous with you, because you won't be able to take it in. They will provide a little locker. They'll give you the key, a little wristband or whatever, and you'll take that in with you. And any, emergency medication. But other than that, you're on your own. And
That's very helpful.
If you need to leave to use the facilities, for example, the clock does not stop. It keeps ticking. So just be aware of that.
Good to know.
So the time frame you have to take the exam, once you start, it rolls until it ends. If you have to go to the washroom in the middle of it, if you got to go, you got to go. But just remember, that is chewing up test time. So make it as quick as you possibly can.
What should I expect when I actually take the test? What should I think about?
Well, and this is where the prepping kind of bleeds into taking the exam. So one of the other things I'd mention is, people have a tendency to cram the night before an exam. It's just the way we are. Please do not do that. You know this stuff. It's in your head. You just don't realize it's there. You're much better off to get a good night's sleep and arrive there fresh and ready to go. Because if you're tired, you're starting at a disadvantage. Because when you finally get in the test room, and back in the day when I took my first certification exam, it was still when they were done in paper. So it's not even like the picture behind me where you had the circles. It was multiple choice. The first part of the exam, circle the answer, not fill in the machine read ones, and case study. So a short case study had to be prepped many, many, many years ago. But they put the exam paper down on my desk, face down, and they said, when the time was to start, turn your test paper over. And I turned it over and looked at the first question and choked. I don't know any of this. Nerves, right? So if you have a good night's sleep, and when they say, okay, start, and you don't know the answer to the first question, breathe. Just remember to breathe, right? Because that will settle you down. And if you don't know the answer to the first question, move to the second one. So what I always tell students is read the questions carefully.
Yes.
Do not assume, do not interpret. You may think that there's not enough information there to make a decision, but that happens to us all the time at work, right? We're given bits and pieces of stuff, and the question is, what do you think we should do? Well, based on what you've shown me, until I get more information, this is it. And that's what those scenarios are like. So read them carefully. Don't assume, don't interpret. And I think the most difficult thing for people to get over is that these questions will relate to procurement global best practices. So when you're working every day in your shop, following your policies and procedures, that's where your head is stuck. Your nose has been to the grindstone. That is kind of embedded in your DNA at that point. you have to set that aside because our own entities, policies, and procedures may not be as well aligned with global best practices as we would hope they would be. And there could be a lot of reasons for that. There may be, local jurisprudence that says something different. It could be the governing body has made a particular decision that flies in the face of best practice. Who knows what it is? But we have to set that aside, how we do it every day at work, and focus on what the global best practice is, because that's what the exam is testing, your knowledge of best practices.
Yes.
Sometimes there might be a bit of extraneous information in the question that really just, fills out the scenario, but really doesn't have that much relevance. So when you read through those questions, if you read it the first time and you don't know the answer, read it a second time. If you still don't know it, move on to the next one rather than wasting your time, because at the end of the exam, it will show you which ones you bypassed. And you can go back and review those and answer them at that point. There may actually be a question further on that will trigger your memory and you go, oh, that's what that question was about. How could I have been so silly and not knowing that? But in those questions where there's some extraneous stuff, you may have to really determine what's the question that's being asked. Because that stuff could be in there to attempt to sidetrack you. So what is the question? And when it comes to the answers, when you read through them, some of them you'll go, oh, that's obviously wrong. Well, you can discount those. And keep in mind there may be two answers that are both correct to some extent, but part of what the exam is looking for is critical thinking and logic. Two of them could be correct, but which one is the most correct? So which one is the best out of those two options? And we do that all the time at work. So it's going to be this kind of the same, pulling information out of you during the exam.
Right.
One of the other things that people have commented to me when they've come back to me and said, there was this tricky question. And it was around what I call trigger words, things like always, we always do this, or we never do that until the day we do. So I suggest, yes, because stuff happens, right? So I suggest to them, if they see those types of trigger words, we always do this or we never do that, that's kind of a red flag to really pay attention and, look at it very critically, because it may be correct in most instances, but not necessarily all the time, because we do have exceptions to stuff, right?
Yes.
And please, anyone who's taking an exam, don't second guess yourself. I've had students tell me, and I've said this to them during the prep class, don't second guess yourself. Do not go back if you've got the time and review the questions and go, I think I got that one wrong, because they changed it and they had it right the first time. They second guessed themselves. Sometimes our gut is what leads us to the correct answer. If we try to fight it and we second guess ourselves, more often than not, we could be changing a correct answer to an incorrect one.
Right.
As far as the time goes, there is time to do it. Keep in mind that there are going to be other people in the testing center that are taking exams. They're not the same exam you're taking. So if they get up and leave, it doesn't mean that, they know it better than you do because they're not taking the same exam. It's just their timeline is up or their exam is finished. They've left. You'll have new people coming in to take an exam because the clock runs on each individual computer station, not the clock in the room.
Right.
But if you spend time churning over a particular question, you're burning up that time. Every question that you don't have the opportunity to get to is one that's automatically incorrect. So that's why I say, read it once. If you don't understand it or get the answer, read it a second time and then move on and come back to it if you have time. Because if you can get through all the questions, you have higher likelihood of, answering more questions correctly.
Right.
And I've had people say to me, I had one student who called me after she wrote one of her certification exams, because she took 3 of them within the space of about 8 months. And she said, after the first one, she said, I passed. I just have to tell you, I passed. And I said, well, I knew you would. And she said, but what you told me would happen did. I sat down to read the first question and I choked. And she said, I could hear you in my head saying, breathe. Remember to breathe. Read the questions carefully. Don't assume, don't interpret. She said, and I passed.
That's wonderful.
So
that is wonderful.
I don't know if it's a good thing being in somebody's head all the time or not, but apparently it helps some of them. So, and these are standard things that I share with students all the time because it's things they worry about, right? Will I have enough time?
Sure.
How do I pick what do you mean by the most correct answer? Well, it's either right or it's wrong. Well, maybe not. Being able to remember something doesn't necessarily mean that you can actually do it. And that's the big difference. So this competency-based, the critical thinking, very significant change in the educational environment and in test setting questions, because that's what they're looking for, the ability to think on your feet. I've had more than one student in a class. In fact, most classes, there's usually at least one that has taken the exam the first time and not been successful. And almost without failure, when we're talking in class the second time about the questions that they missed, because they'll have some idea of, what they knew they got wrong just based on the material that we're going through. And it's because they thought about how their jurisdiction does stuff and they answered based on that, as opposed to global best practices. And they'll go, obviously, I was thinking about our own policy. And it's not what we would expect it to be. In fact, we're in the process of reviewing them right now. So a good majority of them come back and said, that's why I missed a lot of those questions, because I reverted to how my shop does it as opposed to what's the global best practice.
Any parting words?
Well, I guess the only thing that I would add to what you've just said, Barb, is that back in the day when I got my certification, I was dealing with architects and engineers and medical staff, all who have some sort of license or certification. And once I had my own professional procurement certification, I certainly got the response from them or the impression from them that improved my credibility with them in the job that I did, because it was perceived to be at a higher level rather than just, it's all transactional here. Just here's the requisition, give me a PO for that and let's move on. They tended to pay more attention, at least that was my perception. It was, I think, easier to form relationships with them as well as a client, because there was now a recognition that there's some sort of expertise on both sides. So that's the ultimate goal, is to, lifelong learning, but it's also to help build that rapport with your clients and your supplier base, because we never stop learning. We continue to learn all the time. Doesn't matter how old we get. And I can attest to that. So,
well, and they never stop learning either, based on technology or the work in their business. And there are a lot of things in terms of being logical and so forth that may stay the same, but the subject matter changes and minimal information, as you said. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to be interviewed and for all the work you've done for all the NIGP and others memberships or individuals who are just have a goal to become certified, and the amount of work that you've put in many ways for this to happen over the year or two that we've been doing this has made a difference in the profession.
I mean, we're both passionate about procurement, but probably one of the highlights is when I have, a student who comes back and says, I wrote my certification exam and I passed, and that prep class was so helpful, or the tips you gave me were so helpful. So as part of paying it forward, it's like David with his question of the day, the effort that he puts into that free of charge to help other people in the profession improve and be successful. That's what it's all about, and thereby making our entities more successful as well. So that's the end game, right?
This is Barb Johnson with my colleague Linda Allaire, and this is Radio NIGP. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.